The stars over Earth had never looked so beautiful or so terrifying. For generations, humanity had dreamed of peace among the stars. They had sent explorers to distant worlds, established colonies, and finally earned a seat on the prestigious Galactic Council, a union of advanced civilizations who claimed to protect peace across the galaxy. For a while, it seemed as though humanity's place among the stars was secure. They were no longer the newcomers. They were equals. But peace is fragile, and envy is a dangerous thing. It began as whispers, rumors of a hostile fleet moving through the outer rim, unidentified vessels with weapons too powerful to ignore. At first, the Council dismissed them as pirates or rogue factions. Humanity prepared quietly, strengthening its defenses, hoping the rumors would pass. Then the sky fell. The first attack struck without warning. Orbital stations around Jupiter vanished in seconds. A colony on Europa was turned into molten glass. Within hours, Earth's long-range sensors picked up hundreds, no, thousands of enemy ships breaching the Sol system. They were fast, coordinated, and relentless. The invaders called themselves the Tarkun Dominion, an empire that had spent centuries conquering weaker civilizations. Humanity, still young by galactic standards, was seen as a ripe target. The Tarkun believed Earth would be easy to crush, a lesson to the rest of the Council that no one could rise without their permission. But they were wrong. The Galactic Council met in emergency session. Panic filled the chamber as delegates shouted over one another, their fear echoing through the Grand Hall. "They're attacking Earth itself," roared Ambassador Zelkin of the Rithari. "The humans won't survive. Their fleet is too small." "This is a disaster," hissed Chairman Vaxel, a towering insectoid whose species had once ruled half the known galaxy. "If Earth falls, it will destabilize the entire Council." "And what do you suggest we do?" spat High Delegate Lortia of the Krylian Alliance. "Intervene. Risk war with the Tarkun. This is their conflict, not ours." "Not ours," Zelkin slammed a fist on the table. "Humanity is part of this council. If we abandon them now, no species will ever trust us again." The debate raged for hours. Some wanted to send aid, others insisted on neutrality. But beneath the political arguments was something deeper: fear. The Tarkun Dominion had crushed empires far older and stronger than humanity. If Earth fell quickly, the Council could pretend it had never happened. But if Earth fought back, truly fought back, the galaxy would never be the same again. On Earth, the situation was desperate. Cities prepared for evacuation. Planetary defense platforms were activated. Every available ship, from ancient frigates to prototype dreadnoughts, was pulled into orbit. Humanity had never faced a threat like this. The United Earth Defense Command, UEDC, called for every soldier, every pilot, every engineer. Among them was Commander Elias Kale, a veteran of the frontier wars and now in charge of Earth's orbital defense. Standing in the command center deep beneath New Geneva, he watched the incoming enemy fleet on the holoscreen. There were too many. Even with every ship Earth could muster, they were outnumbered 20-1. "Status?" Kale asked quietly. "Outer defense grid is online," replied Lieutenant Mara Ishin, her hands trembling slightly on the console. "Orbital cannons are charged. Civilian evacuations are underway in North America, Asia, and the European sector. But sir," she hesitated, "if they breach the line, we won't be able to hold." Kale nodded slowly. He had known the odds since the moment the Tarkun fleet appeared, but surrender was not an option. Not now, not ever. "Then we make them pay for every inch of space," he said. "This is our home, and we're not going to roll over and die." When the Tarkun fleet arrived, it was like watching the apocalypse unfold. The skies above Earth filled with burning light as the first wave slammed into the outer defense ring. Dozens of human ships were destroyed in minutes. The Tarkun advanced without mercy, their weapons cutting through shields and armor as if they were paper. From the ground, the people of Earth could see streaks of fire crossing the night sky, the final stand of their defenders. Families huddled together in shelters. Soldiers kissed their loved ones goodbye. Children asked if the monsters would land. No one had answers. And yet, even as ships exploded and cities shook, humanity refused to break. The Galactic Council watched the battle unfold through live transmissions. Silence filled the chamber as one human ship after another vanished from the tactical displays. Delegates who had once mocked humanity's ambition now stared in horror. "By the stars," whispered Zelkin, "they're still fighting." "They should have surrendered by now," hissed Vaxol, his mandibles clicking nervously. "No species can resist such a force." "They're human," Zelkin replied quietly. "Surrender isn't in their nature." Still, the outcome seemed inevitable. The Tarkun had overwhelming numbers. Earth's defenses were crumbling. The human fleet was scattered. The Council began preparing for the worst: evacuation plans, refugee contingencies, political damage control. And then something unexpected happened. Deep within Earth's military network, sealed beneath layers of security protocols, a code was activated, a contingency plan that had never been used, never even discussed in public. It was known only by a single name: Project Aegis. For decades, humanity had been quietly preparing for the possibility of annihilation. They had studied alien technology, reverse-engineered captured warships, and built weapons the Council believed they were too primitive to understand. The galaxy saw humans as fragile, weak, untested. They were about to see how wrong they were. In the cold silence beyond Neptune, something stirred: massive shapes emerging from the darkness, cloaked and silent. One by one, colossal warships powered up, each the size of a small moon. They were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, built in secret, forged for one purpose: survival. The Tarkun fleet paused, sensors detecting new signatures. And for the first time since the war began, their commanders hesitated. On Earth, Commander Kale looked up as alarms sounded across the command center. "Sir," Mara whispered, her voice shaking, "they're here." Kale's lips curled into a small, defiant smile. "Then let's show the galaxy what humanity can do." Silence fell over the war-torn system. For hours, the Tarkun fleet had burned its way through humanity's defenses, destroying ships and stations with ruthless precision. Every moment brought Earth closer to total annihilation. But now, as their sensors screamed warnings and their ships scrambled to adjust their formations, the tide of battle shifted in a way no one had expected. The Project Aegis fleet, humanity's greatest secret, had entered the fight. They appeared like ghosts from the darkness beyond Neptune, massive warships emerging from the void. Some were sleek and angular, others brutal and monstrous, but all were built with a single purpose: to make humanity unstoppable. The largest of them, the UHS Dauntless, was a super dreadnought that dwarfed anything the Tarkun had ever constructed. Its hull gleamed with layers of reinforced armor, its cannons glowed with destructive power. The Tarkun fleet halted, unsure of what they were seeing. To them, humanity was supposed to be weak, technologically backward, militarily inferior. Yet here, right before their eyes, were ships that shouldn't exist. Commander Elias Kale stood in the command center, his eyes locked on the tactical display. The enemy's advance had slowed. Their tight formation was breaking. For the first time since the battle began, humanity had the advantage. "Status on Aegis fleet," Kale asked calmly. "All units have entered the battle space," Lieutenant Mara Ishin reported. "Dauntless is charging its main weapon. The Tarkun fleet is shifting. They don't know how to respond." Kale allowed himself a rare smile. "Good, let them be confused." High above Earth, the first volley was fired. The Dauntless opened fire with a weapon the galaxy had never seen before: a gravitational lance. A beam of condensed gravity slammed into a Tarkun battleship, bending space itself around the target. In an instant, The massive vessel folded in on itself like paper crushed by an unseen hand, disappearing in a silent implosion. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. The Tarkun fleet responded with a furious barrage. Energy beams, plasma torpedoes, and kinetic slugs rained down on the new human ships. But this time, humanity's defenses held. Their shields, reverse-engineered from alien technology, absorbed the blows. Their armor refused to break. "Return fire," Kale ordered. The command spread across the Aegis fleet. Thousands of guns lit up the void, unleashing a storm of destruction. Tarkun cruisers shattered under focused barrages. Carriers burst into flames. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone knew it. In the Galactic Council chamber, chaos erupted. "They have super dreadnoughts," shouted Zelkin, his scaled fists slamming the table. "How did they build them? When did they build them?" "They weren't supposed to have this kind of technology," muttered Vaxel, his mandibles twitching nervously. "We've been watching them for decades. This shouldn't be possible." "It is possible," Coralyn of the Rylak said quietly, a hint of admiration in her voice. "And they just proved it." The council members exchanged uneasy glances. If humanity could build a fleet like this in secret, what else were they capable of? Had they underestimated Earth from the very beginning? For the first time, fear began to creep into the hearts of those who had once looked down on humanity. On the battlefield, the tide continued to turn. The Tarkun commander, Admiral Esrek, watched in disbelief as ship after ship vanished from his tactical display. His empire's mightiest fleet, the one that had crushed hundreds of worlds, was being pushed back. It was unthinkable. "Concentrate fire on the largest vessel," he snarled. "Bring it down." Dozens of Tarkun ships focused their weapons on the Dauntless. The space around it burned as beam after beam slammed into its shields. The massive warship shuddered under the assault, but it did not fall. Inside the Dauntless, alarms blared. Engineers shouted as systems overloaded. Bulkheads groaned under the pressure, but the crew held their ground. "Main reactor stable," reported Chief Engineer Saria Tan. "Shields at 64% and holding. We can take this." "Then take it," Kale replied from Earth Command, "and give it back." The Dauntless unleashed a storm of plasma torpedoes, each one guided by an AI targeting system designed to exploit weaknesses in Tarkun armor. Explosions blossomed across the enemy lines. Frigates disintegrated. Cruisers were torn in half. The Tarkun offensive collapsed. But even as victory loomed, humanity knew the battle was far from over. On the ground, cities burned. Orbital debris rained from the sky. Civilian casualties mounted. The Tarkun fleet had not come just to destroy Earth, they had come to make an example of it, and they still had thousands of ships in reserve. Kale stood before the viewport in the command center, watching the flashes of battle in orbit. "We've bought ourselves time," he said quietly, "but this isn't the end." Mara nodded. "Do you think they'll retreat?" "No," Kale replied. "Not yet. They're too proud for that, but they're learning something they never expected, that humanity doesn't kneel." Far beyond the battlefield, in a hidden sector of space, the Tarkun High Command watched the disaster unfold. They were silent at first, too stunned to speak. Then the shouting began. "How did they build ships like that?" "Impossible. Their industrial capacity shouldn't allow this. They're supposed to be prey." But Admiral Esrek's message cut through the noise, transmitted from the front lines. "The humans are not prey, they are predators, and if we do not change our approach, they will devour us." The Tarkun War Council fell silent. The words were heavy with truth. Humanity was no longer the weak, primitive species they had dismissed. They were something else entirely, something dangerous. Back on Earth, as the sun rose over a scarred and battered planet, Commander Kale walked the halls of the command center. He passed tired soldiers, injured crew, and anxious families waiting for news. Everyone was exhausted, but there was a spark in their eyes, a spark of something the Tarkun had never counted on. Hoping. Humanity had faced annihilation and survived. They had revealed strength beyond what anyone had believed possible. And though the war was far from over, one thing was certain now. The galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. Kale paused by a window, watching the burning wreckage of Tarkun ships drift across the sky. He clenched his fists, his voice barely above a whisper. This is just the beginning. The first battle was over, but the war had only just begun. In the days that followed the clash in Earth's orbit, the galaxy was in shock. Messages poured across the stars, some filled with admiration, others with fear. Humanity's sudden display of strength had shattered the old assumptions. No one had imagined that Earth, a relatively new member of the Galactic Council, could face down the mighty Tarkun Dominion and survive. But survival was not victory. The Tarkun had retreated, but only to regroup. Their pride had been wounded. Empires like theirs did not tolerate humiliation. And now they were preparing a second strike, one that would be far larger, far more brutal than anything humanity had seen before. Commander Elias Kale knew it was coming. He had seen the enemy's tactics before: pull back, reinforce, then return with overwhelming force. As he stood in the underground command bunker beneath New Geneva, the glow of tactical displays reflecting off his tired eyes, he felt the weight of the coming storm. "Status report," he said quietly. "Enemy reinforcements detected," Lieutenant Mara Ishin replied. Her voice was calm, but her hands shook slightly. "Long-range sensors show 3 fleets converging on Sol. Estimated time of arrival, 40 hours. Kale nodded grimly. "How many ships?" "More than 3,000, sir," Mara said. "This isn't a fleet, it's an armada." The Tarkun were furious. In their war council aboard the dreadnought Crimson Maw, Admiral Esrek stood before a star map, his claws digging into the table. Around him, his generals whispered nervously. "We underestimated them," one said. "They've developed weapons beyond our projections," another muttered. Esrek's eyes burned with cold hatred. "Then we will burn them to ash. I want every resource deployed, every ship, every soldier. Earth will fall or the Tarkun will die trying." Back on Earth, preparations began. The United Earth Defense Command, UEDC, mobilized every asset. Reserve fleets were recalled. Orbital defense platforms were repaired and upgraded. Cities were fortified and civilian evacuations continued nonstop. It was a race against time, and humanity knew the odds were worse than before. Kale walked through the hangar bays, watching engineers work tirelessly on fighter squadrons and capital ships. Every soldier he passed saluted him, their faces a mix of fear and determination. These were not just warriors, they were ordinary people. Miners, farmers, scientists, and engineers who had become soldiers to protect their home. In one corner, he stopped beside a young pilot, Ensign Leela Chen, who was staring silently at the sky through a window. "Nervous?" Kale asked gently. She turned, surprised, then smiled faintly. "I guess I am, sir. I've never fought in a real battle before. I thought joining the fleet would be about exploring new worlds, not fighting for our survival." Kale looked at her with understanding. "I wish that were the case, but history doesn't give us the battles we want. It gives us the ones we must fight." Leela nodded, her expression firming. "I won't run, none of us will." Kale placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "That's why we'll win." Across the galaxy, the Council watched with growing anxiety. Some urged sending aid, while others wanted to distance themselves from the conflict. But none could ignore the truth anymore. If Earth fell, the Tarkun would not stop there. Humanity's stand had become more than a fight for survival. It was now a fight for the balance of power across the stars. "Perhaps we should intervene," Zelkin argued during an emergency meeting. "If the Tarkun destroy Earth, who will they come for next?" "We cannot risk war with the Dominion," Vax'il snapped. If humanity provoked them, humanity must face the consequences. Consequences, Coralin of the Rilak hissed. They defended their home. They showed courage none of us have shown in centuries, and you call that provocation. The debate raged on, but the council remained paralyzed by fear and politics. No fleets would come to Earth's aid. Humanity would stand alone. 40 hours later, the sky burned once more. The second Tarkun armada burst into the Sol system like a tidal wave. Their ships blotted out the stars, carriers, battleships, siege platforms, and monstrous dreadnoughts bristling with weapons. The scale of the invasion was unlike anything humanity had ever faced. Contact in 20 minutes, Mara reported. They're heading straight for Earth. Kale stared at the tactical display. It was worse than he'd imagined. All fleets prepare for engagement, activate planetary shields, lock defense grids. A chorus of acknowledgments echoed across the command center. Humanity was ready, or as ready as they could ever be. The first battle was fierce. Tarkun ships surged forward, their guns unleashing torrents of energy. Human ships met them head-on, interceptors weaving between battleships, bombers targeting weak points, dreadnoughts exchanging devastating salvos. Space lit up with explosions as hundreds of ships were torn apart. Despite their bravery, humanity was being pushed back. The Tarkun numbers were overwhelming. One by one, orbital platforms fell. Aegis cruisers exploded under concentrated fire. For every Tarkun ship destroyed, 3 more seemed to take its place. Left flank collapsing, Mara shouted. We're losing ground. Reinforce with Fleet Group Delta, Kale ordered. No retreat. But even as they struggled, humanity had one more card to play, something even the Council did not know about. Deep beneath the lunar surface, hidden for decades, an enormous structure began to awaken. It was the heart of Earth's ultimate contingency plan, Project Helios, a planetary defense array built around a captured stellar core. Its activation had always been a last resort, but now there was no choice. Project Helios is online, came the report. Kale exhaled slowly. Fire. The moon shook as Helios unleashed a beam of pure stellar energy. It cut across the void like a blade of light, vaporizing everything in its path. Tarkun ships disintegrated instantly. Their advance stopped dead. For a moment, the battlefield fell silent. Across the galaxy, billions watched in awe. The once dismissed humans, weak, fragile, naive, had become something else entirely. They were warriors forged by desperation, innovators born of survival, and they were no longer playing by anyone else's rules. On the bridge of the Crimson Maw, Admiral Esrek stared at the destruction on his displays. Dozens of ships gone in seconds. The impossible had happened again. Impossible, he hissed. What are they? His second-in-command swallowed hard. Sir, they're human. On Earth, Commander Kale looked up at the burning horizon, his heart heavy but resolute. We will not fall, he whispered to himself. Not now, not ever. And somewhere deep in his chest, amid the fear and exhaustion, a fire began to burn, a fire that would carry humanity through the darkest war it had ever faced. This was no longer just a fight for Earth. It was a message to the galaxy. Humanity was the battle for Earth had lasted 7 days. 7 days of unending fire and blood. 7 days of sacrifice, courage, and desperate hope. The skies above the planet were littered with the wreckage of ships, Tarkun and human alike, floating as silent monuments to the ferocity of the war. And yet, against every prediction, Earth still stood. Humanity had not fallen. Project Helios had turned the tide. The lunar weapon's devastating power had crippled the Tarkun armada, destroying hundreds of ships in a single blast. It was a victory no one had expected, not even the humans themselves. But victory had come at a cost. The fleet was battered. Millions were dead. Cities lay in ruins. Commander Elias Kale stood on the observation deck of Earth Command, staring at the glowing remains of the battlefield. His heart was heavy. Every victory carried the weight of loss. "How bad?" he asked quietly. Lieutenant Mara Ishin stood beside him, reading from a datapad. "Casualties are still being counted. We estimate nearly 2 million dead across all fronts. Infrastructure damage is severe. Orbital stations are gone. And Sir Helios is offline. It needs weeks to recharge." Kale nodded slowly. "Weeks we don't have." Because even now, the Tarkun were regrouping. Their armada was broken, but their empire was vast. Another wave would come stronger and more determined than the last. If humanity waited for them to strike again, Earth might not survive the next assault. "We can't keep fighting like this," Mara whispered. "If we stay on the defensive, they'll crush us eventually." Kale turned toward her, his eyes hard. "Then we don't stay on the defensive." It was a sentence that would change the course of the war. 2 days later, the United Earth Defense Command convened an emergency meeting. Military leaders, government officials, and representatives from the colonies joined via HoloLink. The air was tense, filled with exhaustion and fear, but also with something new: determination. Kale stood before them, the stars of Saul projected behind him. "For weeks, we've fought to protect our home," he began. "And we've done what no one thought possible. We've held the line. But holding isn't winning. And if we keep waiting for the Tarkun to strike, they'll keep coming until we're gone." A murmur rippled through the room. The unspoken truth was one they all understood. "We need to take the fight to them," Kale continued. "We strike first, not for revenge, not for glory, but to show them that humanity doesn't just survive, we fight back." "An offensive?" Admiral Hashino asked skeptically. "Do we even have the strength left for that?" "Barely," Kale admitted. "But we have something the Tarkun don't: resolve. They think we're broken. They think we'll stay on our knees. It's time to prove them wrong." There was silence for a long moment. Then, one by one, heads began to nod. Operation Iron Dawn was born. The plan was bold, reckless, even. Humanity would gather every remaining ship, every available resource, and strike deep into Tarkun territory. The target, Krith Prime, a massive fuel and logistics hub that supplied nearly half of the Dominion's war machine. If Krith Prime fell, the Tarkun invasion would falter. Weeks of frantic preparation followed. New ships were hastily constructed. Damaged vessels were repaired. Volunteers from across Earth and its colonies flooded into recruitment centers. Humanity's spirit had been ignited, and nothing could put out the flame now. The Galactic Council watched the preparations with disbelief. "They're mad," hissed Vaxel. "They've barely survived one assault, and now they're planning to attack the Dominion." "They're desperate," Coralyn replied, though her voice carried a hint of admiration. "And desperation can move mountains." "Or destroy them," Zelkin muttered. Yet beneath their skepticism was fear. If humanity succeeded, the balance of power would change forever. If they failed, Earth would be wiped from existence. 3 weeks after the Battle of Earth, the largest human fleet ever assembled gathered beyond Neptune. Hundreds of ships, some brand new, others patched together from wreckage, formed a single defiant spearhead. The UHS Dauntless led the formation, its hull scarred but unbowed. Commander Kale stood on the bridge, dressed in his combat uniform. He looked out at the stars ahead, his expression grim but resolute. "This is more than a battle," he said over the fleet-wide channel. "This is a message to the Tarkun, to the Council, to the galaxy. Humanity will not hide. Humanity will not kneel. We will fight for our home, and we will take the war to those who tried to destroy us." Across the fleet, soldiers and pilots cheered. Some wept. All of them knew they might not return, but none of them hesitated. "Fleet, engage jump drives," Kale ordered. "Set course for Krith Prime." The jump through hyperspace lasted only minutes, but to Kale, it felt like a lifetime. When the fleet emerged, the Tarkun star system lay before them, a swirling red sun, encircled by defense platforms and warships. The enemy had not expected them. Alarms blared across the Tarkun lines as human ships burst into real space and opened fire. "Targets acquired," Mara shouted. "All batteries fire at will." The void exploded with light. Tarkun frigates shattered under focused volleys. Defense satellites were obliterated. Human bombers streaked toward the planet's orbital stations, dropping payloads that tore through their shields. The Dominion scrambled to respond, deploying fleets from nearby sectors. But humanity pressed the attack with relentless fury. They had waited too long for this moment, and they would not be denied. On Krith Prime, panic spread. The Dominion had believed Earth too weak, too broken to retaliate. Now, they faced an enemy that refused to follow the rules of the old galaxy. Humanity was not content to defend, they would hunt. Even Admiral Esrek, watching from his flagship, could not hide his astonishment. "They dare," he whispered. "They dare strike us." "Yes, sir," his aide replied shakily, "and they're winning." After hours of brutal combat, the impossible happened. The fuel stations of Krith Prime erupted in a chain of explosions, their destruction sending shockwaves across the system. Without them, the Tarkun war machine would grind to a halt. Humanity had struck a blow far greater than anyone had dreamed possible. As the fleet prepared to withdraw, Kale stood silently on the bridge. Around him, the crew cheered, but his gaze was fixed on the burning planet below. "This is just the beginning," he murmured. And deep in his heart, he knew the truth: the war was far from over. The Tarkun would not forgive this humiliation. They would return with vengeance. But now, humanity was no longer the hunted. Now they were the hunters. The victory at Krith Prime shook the galaxy to its core. For centuries, no one had dared to strike so deeply into the heart of the Tarkun Dominion. The destruction of their fuel world crippled supply lines, halted invasion fleets, and shattered their aura of invincibility. Across the stars, oppressed species whispered the name of Earth with awe. Humanity had done the impossible, they had wounded the giant. But the Tarkun were not defeated, they were enraged. In the shadowed war chamber aboard the Dominion's capital ship, Blood Rain, the High Lord of the Tarkun, Emperor Scarveth, stood before a star map of the Sol system. His eyes, glowing like embers, burned with hatred. "They dared," he hissed, "they dared strike us on our soil." "Humanity's fleet was smaller than ours," one general said cautiously. "But their courage, it has inspired others. Already, rebel factions rise in the outer colonies." Scarveth's claws tightened around the table until the metal groaned. "Then we will crush their courage. We will burn their home. And when Earth is ash, the galaxy will remember what defiance costs." A new plan was drawn, one far more brutal than the first. This time the Dominion would not simply invade, they would eradicate. On Earth, the mood was both triumphant and uneasy. The victory at Krith Prime had ignited hope, but it had also painted a massive target on humanity, back. Intelligence reports confirmed what Commander Elias Kale already suspected. The Tarkun were preparing a counterattack, larger and deadlier than anything before. "How long do we have?" Kale asked during a strategy meeting. 3 weeks, Lieutenant Mara Ishin replied, scrolling through data. "Our scouts report a massive fleet assembling near the Vornes cluster. We estimate over 6,000 ships, including their planet-killer dreadnoughts." Kale's jaw tightened, and Helios. "Still recharging," Mara said grimly. "We're at 42% capacity." Kale turned toward the others. "Then we have 3 weeks to prepare for hell." The galaxy held its breath as the countdown began. Humanity poured every ounce of strength into fortifying their defenses. New orbital platforms were deployed. Planetary shields were strengthened. Colonies were evacuated to safer systems. Even the Galactic Council, which had hesitated for so long, began to stir. "They cannot survive this alone," said Corlin during an emergency session. If Earth falls, the Tarkun will not stop there. They will come for all of us. Zelkin nodded grimly. I propose we send aid fleets, weapons, whatever we can spare. Unthinkable, Vax'il snapped. The Dominion will see it as a declaration of war. Then let them, Corellin thundered. They are already at war, we're just too cowardly to admit it. But once again, fear and politics overruled courage. The Council voted for neutrality. Humanity would stand alone. 3 weeks later, the sky darkened again. The Tarkun fleet arrived like a tidal wave, their ships blotting out the stars. At its center was the monstrous Oblivion Spear, a dreadnought capable of destroying entire continents. Its weapons could pierce planetary shields. Its cannons could crack moons in half. On Earth, alarms screamed across every city. Civilians fled into bunkers. Defense crews rushed to their stations. Soldiers whispered prayers and made peace with their fate. In the command center, Kale stood before the main screen, watching the incoming armada. He had seen many battles, but nothing like this. They're here, Mara said softly. Kale's voice was calm, but his heart pounded. Then let's remind them whose home they're stepping into. The first clash was brutal. Human ships surged forward, weapons blazing. Tarkun vessels responded with overwhelming firepower. Entire fleets vanished in explosions that lit the void like dying stars. The humans fought with everything they had: courage, fury, desperation. But the enemy's numbers were endless. Sector 4 defense line has collapsed, a voice shouted over the comms. We're losing ground. Redirect the Dauntless to intercept, Kale barked. No retreat, hold the line. Across the planet, orbital defense platforms rained fire upon the enemy. Helios, still only at half power, fired a desperate shot that tore through a Tarkun battle group, but it wasn't enough. The Oblivion Spear advanced relentlessly, cutting a path straight toward Earth. Inside the dreadnought, Admiral Esrek watched the battle unfold with grim satisfaction. Humanity fights like animals, he said, but even animals die. Planetary shield integrity is at 60%, reported one of his officers. We'll breach it in 30 minutes. Esrek smiled, and then Earth burns. On the surface, cities trembled under the assault. Massive energy beams carved scars into continents. Orbital debris rained like fire across the skies. The ground shook as shockwaves rippled through the atmosphere. In one shelter beneath New Geneva, families huddled together, listening to the distant thunder of battle. A little girl clutched a worn teddy bear, her eyes wide with fear. Are we going to die? She whispered. Her mother pulled her close. No, sweetheart, she said softly. Humans don't die that easily. But even Kale knew they were close to breaking. Their fleets were in ruins. Their defenses were failing. The Tarkun had thrown everything they had, and humanity was running out of time. Then a faint signal crackled over the comms. Commander Kale, this is Admiral Hashino. Reinforcements inbound. Kale's eyes widened. Reinforcements from where? The colonies, Hashino replied. Mars, Titan, Europa, and the frontier worlds. Every ship they could spare is on its way. Kale stared at the tactical screen as hundreds of new signatures appeared. Civilian ships converted into war vessels, freighters armed with railguns, mining ships retrofitted with missile batteries. It was a ragtag fleet, but it was human. They're answering the call, Mara whispered. Kale smiled faintly. Then let's make them proud. The arrival of the colonial fleet reignited the battle. Together, they launched a desperate counteroffensive. Tarkun cruisers fell under relentless fire. Fighters swarmed enemy dreadnoughts like hornets, targeting engines and weak points. And slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn. But the Oblivion Spear remained unstoppable. Its colossal main cannon charged, glowing with deadly energy. One shot would pierce Earth's shield and end the war. Kale stared at the display, his chest tight. If that cannon fires, it's over. Myra looked at him, eyes wide. What do we do? Kale took a deep breath. We stop it even if it costs everything. The Dauntless, Earth's mightiest ship, surged forward straight into the heart of the enemy fleet. Its guns blazed, clearing a path toward the Oblivion Spear. The Tarkun opened fire, tearing into its hull, but still it advanced. "Helm all power to engines," Kale shouted. "Target their cannon core." The Dauntless closed the distance, its main reactor glowing dangerously hot. And as the enemy weapon prepared to fire, Kale gave the final order. "Detonate!" The Dauntless exploded in a brilliant flash, a sacrifice that tore through the dreadnought's hull and crippled its weapon. The cannon never fired. Silence followed, then cheers. The Oblivion Spear was dead. The Tarkun fleet, stunned and leaderless, began to retreat. Humanity had survived barely, painfully, but defiantly. As the smoke cleared, Kale's voice echoed across every channel. "We are still here." And across the galaxy, species who had once doubted humanity now whispered a different word. Hope. The smoke from the battle over Earth still lingered in the void. The Tarkun had been pushed back, their planet-killer dreadnought destroyed. Humanity had survived, battered, bleeding, but unbroken. Billions mourned the dead. Cities lay in ruins. The Dauntless, Earth's greatest warship, was gone, its crew heroes remembered by name. But for the first time since the war began, hope burned brighter than fear. Commander Elias Kale stood on the observation deck of the United Earth Command, staring out at the stars. It had been 3 days since the victory, but he had barely slept. Every moment replayed in his mind: the desperate fight, the sacrifice, the explosion that had saved their home. The war wasn't over, not even close. But humanity had proven one undeniable truth: they could not be broken. "Status?" Kale asked quietly as Lieutenant Mara Ishin joined him. "Enemy fleets have retreated beyond the Vornes cluster," she reported. "Our scouts confirm they're regrouping, but their momentum is shattered. We have time, sir, a few weeks, maybe more." Kale nodded. "Then we use it, we prepare for the next phase." Mara hesitated. "Sir, after everything, do you really think we can win?" Kale turned to face her, his expression hard but calm. "We already have. We showed the galaxy that humanity will not bow. Now we finish what they started." The galaxy was watching. News of Earth's defiance spread across every star system, every colony, every outpost. Billions of eyes turned toward the small blue world that had faced the most powerful empire in the galaxy and survived. The story of humanity's resistance spread like wildfire, inspiring whispers of rebellion on worlds that had been under Tarkun rule for centuries. And for the first time in generations, the Dominion felt fear. Inside the halls of the Galactic Council, old rivalries began to crumble. The delegates, once divided by greed and fear, now spoke with urgency. The Tarkun had overstepped. If Earth could be targeted, then so could any of them. "We cannot stand by any longer," said Zelkin of the Rithari. "Humanity fought alone, and they still endure. If we continue to do nothing, the Dominion will destroy us one by one." "They are weak now," added Coralin of the Rylak. "We have an opportunity to strike, but not alone, together." "Together," scoffed Vaxel. "You mean an alliance with humans?" "Yes," Coralin replied firmly. "The humans have something we do not, the will to fight even when the odds are impossible. That is the strength we need." For the first time in centuries, the Council voted unanimously, not for sanctions or neutrality, but for unity. A coalition was to be formed, one that would stand against the Dominion, and at its heart would be humanity. Back on Earth, preparations for a counteroffensive were already underway. Shipyards worked around the clock. Engineers designed new weapons, faster ships, stronger shields. The colonies rallied together, sending fleets and volunteers. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival, they were fighting for victory. But Kale knew they couldn't do it alone. He stood before the hollow table in the war room, maps of the galaxy scattered before him. "We've hurt them," he said to his officers. "But the Dominion still controls hundreds of worlds. If we want to end this, we need allies." "And who would join us?" asked Admiral Hashino. "The Council, they've watched us bleed without lifting a finger." "They're watching us win now," Kale replied. "That changes everything." A month later, the first ships of the newly formed coalition of free systems arrived in Earth orbit. Sleek Rithari cruisers, insected Krylian carriers, and agile Rylax strike ships joined humanity's battered fleet. The sight brought tears to many once enemies, now allies, united under a single cause. Kale stood on the deck of the newly commissioned flagship UHS Resolute, watching the incoming vessels with quiet pride. "They came," he murmured. Mara smiled. "They finally believe." The coalition leaders met in a historic summit on Luna Base. For days they debated, planned, and argued, but one truth united them all: the Dominion had to fall. And humanity, once dismissed as primitive and weak, would lead the charge. Far across the galaxy, in the iron halls of the Tarkun capital, Emperor Scarveth raged. The news of the alliance infuriated him. Never before had so many species united against the Dominion. "They defy us," he roared. "They dare challenge our rule." "Humanity has united them," Admiral Esrek said bitterly. "They fight not just for Earth now, they fight for freedom." Scarveth slammed his clawed hand on the table. "Then we crush their spirit, we burn their alliance, and we show the galaxy what happens when they follow humans." The final phase of the war had begun. For the first time in history, fleets from dozens of species assembled under a single banner. Humanity led the vanguard, their ships at the forefront of every formation. Across the stars, systems once under Tarkun control rose in rebellion. Spaceports fell. Garrisons were overrun. The Dominion, once unstoppable, now found itself fighting on 100 fronts. Commander Kale, aboard the Resolute, watched the unfolding chaos with grim satisfaction. "They thought they could break us," he said quietly. "Instead, they united us." Myra looked at him with a small smile. "What's our next target?" Kale tapped the glowing star map. "Their heart, Dravos Prime. We end this where it began." The coalition's advance was relentless. One by one, Dominion worlds fell. Some surrendered without a fight, their populations rising up against their masters. Others resisted fiercely, forcing brutal battles in orbit and on the ground. Humanity's name echoed across every front, a rallying cry, a symbol of resistance. But victory came with sacrifice. Thousands of ships were lost. Millions of lives were given. Every step forward was paid for in blood. And yet, the resolve of humanity and their allies never faltered. They were fighting for more than survival now. They were fighting for the future. In the quiet moments between battles, Kale often found himself standing by the viewport, staring out at the stars. They looked different now, brighter, closer, full of possibilities. For centuries, humanity had dreamed of exploring them. Now they were fighting to ensure they remained free. "Do you think we'll win?" Mara asked one night, her voice soft. Kale didn't answer immediately. He thought of the billions who had died, the countless worlds still under Dominion rule, the enormous task still ahead. Then he smiled faintly. "I think we already have, because no matter what happens next, humanity will never kneel again." And as the coalition fleet prepared for the final campaign, a message spread across the galaxy. From Earth to the farthest colonies, from rebel strongholds to council chambers. Humanity is coming. And this time they were not coming alone. The stars over Dravos Prime burned blood-red. This was it, the heart of the Tarkun Dominion, the world from which they had ruled the galaxy with iron claws for millennia. Their fleets had conquered hundreds of civilizations. Their armies had crushed rebellions before they began. And now, for the first time in history, enemy ships filled their skies. The coalition armada stretched from horizon to horizon, a living sea of warships, human, Rithari, Krylian, Rylak, and dozens more. At its center, leading the charge, was the flagship UHS Resolute, bearing the blue and white banner of Earth. On its bridge, Commander Elias Kale stood silent, his gaze fixed on the swirling planet below. His heart was steady, but the weight of what was about to happen pressed heavily on his shoulders. Everything, every sacrifice, every loss, every tear had led them here. "This is it," said Lieutenant Mara Ishin, her voice a mixture of awe and fear. "The final battle." Kale nodded. "The Dominion will throw everything they have at us, but we end this today." The Tarkun fleet waited above Dravo's prime like a coiled serpent, massive dreadnoughts, swarms of cruisers, and countless fighters. At its center was the Imperial Citadel, a colossal fortress ship larger than any vessel humanity had ever built. Inside, Emperor Scarveth watched the approaching armada, rage burning in his ancient eyes. "So they come," he snarled. "The insects think they can slay a god." "Your Excellency," Admiral Esrek warned, "their numbers are vast. Our outlying fleets are gone. We stand alone." "Then we make our stand here," Scarveth growled. "Dravo's prime does not fall, not now, not ever." The first shots lit up the void like the birth of new stars. The Coalition's vanguard surged forward, their weapons blazing. Tarkun warships answered with brutal fury, energy beams tearing through the darkness. The space between fleets became a storm of fire and wreckage. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes, their debris scattering across the stars. "Shields down to 60%, shouted a technician aboard the Resolute. "Redirect power to the forward batteries," Kale ordered. "We break their line here and now." Human battleships, once mocked as outdated and weak, punched through Tarkun cruisers with terrifying precision. Rithari plasma cannons burned holes in dreadnought armor. Rylak stealth fighters slipped behind enemy lines, striking at command ships. And in the chaos, the Resolute drove straight toward the Citadel. The battle raged for hours. Neither side yielded. The Tarkun fought like a cornered beast, desperate and deadly. The Coalition pressed forward with unbreakable resolve. Dozens of ships were lost every minute. Space itself seemed to scream under the weight of so much death. And still humanity advanced. On the bridge, Kale felt the ship tremble under heavy fire. Sparks flew from shattered consoles. Smoke filled the air, yet his voice never wavered. "Helm, push us closer," he barked. "We're not stopping until that monster falls." "Sir," Mara shouted, "if we get any closer, we're in range of their super cannon." Kale turned toward the massive silhouette of the Citadel. "Then let them fire. We'll be too close for them to miss." Inside the Imperial Citadel, Scarveth watched in disbelief as the human flagship closed the distance. "They charge us," he snarled. "Fools, end them." The Citadel's supercannon, a weapon capable of vaporizing entire fleets, began to charge, its massive core glowing crimson. Across the Coalition fleet, alarms blared. If it fired, the battle would be lost. "They're targeting us," Mara shouted. Kale's eyes narrowed. "Then we make sure they don't get the chance." The Resolute dove headlong into the heart of the Tarkun defense line, weaving through a hail of enemy fire. It was madness, suicide, but it was the only way. Human destroyers followed, forming a protective wall around their flagship. "Target the cannon's focusing array," Kale commanded. "All ships concentrate fire." Beams of energy and kinetic shells hammered into the Citadel's hull. Explosions ripped across its surface, tearing through layers of armor. The supercannon's charge faltered but did not stop. 30 seconds to firing," shouted Mara. "Keep firing," Kale roared. "Everything you've got." Then from the depths of the fleet, a signal came through, Admiral Hashino's voice, calm and resolute. "Commander Kale, we have one chance." Kale's heart sank as he saw what Hashino meant. The Vanguard, humanity's second-largest ship, was turning directly toward the Citadel on a collision course. "Admiral, you won't make it out," Kale said softly. Hashino's reply was quiet but firm. No one ever does in stories like this. Tell Earth it was worth it. And then the Vanguard accelerated, engines burning white-hot as it slammed into the Citadel's cannon core. The resulting explosion was blinding. The Citadel shuddered violently, fire consuming its upper decks. The supercannon's charge collapsed, detonating in a chain reaction that ripped the massive fortress apart from within. A roar erupted across the Coalition fleet. "The cannon is down," Mara shouted. "The Citadel is falling." Kale stared at the dying behemoth, his chest heavy with both triumph and sorrow. "Then we finish this." With their flagship destroyed and their fleet shattered, the Tarkun broke. One by one, their ships surrendered or fled into deep space. The battle for Dravos Prime, the war for the galaxy, was over. In the aftermath, silence fell across the stars. On the surface of Dravos Prime, Scarveth was captured not by an army, but by a coalition of species once enslaved by his empire. The Dominion's banners were torn down, its prisons opened, its slaves freed. In the Great Hall of the Galactic Council, humanity stood at the center as victors, not conquerors, but liberators. Worlds once divided by hatred and fear now stood together. The age of empires was over. A new era had begun. Commander Elias Kale returned to Earth a hero. But when asked how humanity had achieved the impossible, he only smiled and said, "It wasn't strength. It wasn't technology. It was the will to stand when the universe told us to kneel. Humanity did not rise alone, we rose together." Decades later, when children across the galaxy studied the war, they did not remember it as the human war. They called it something else, something far greater. The day the galaxy changed. And they would whisper, with awe and gratitude, the words that had united them all. "We are stronger together."